I've referred them to behavioral health at Select Health, of course, but they wait 6 to 8 hours that's on a good day.
Yeah.
To get whoever's on call to come in, and you're right, they just tell the mom, well, take 2 Tylenol and follow up with your PCP.
Yeah, lock up your weapons and go home.
You have a safety plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the other side to that is you can also work with other community resources within that. So if you don't have the behavioral health within your own group, there are other resources out there that you can really work very closely with to provide a good kind of continuum of care. Because there's a lot of behavioral health and mental health facilities out there that are right there to help and to give services or put you in the right direction and be willing to help parents and things like that. So you can definitely work very closely with community resources as well.
I think Salt Lake County is more tapped in to that. We had Utah County it's a little bit of a unique animal, and I don't think our bench was as deep as Salt Lake, and the community resources were too limited to provide what felt like an appropriate timing for patients that had those kind of needs.
Something that's expeditious versus now we're on another list waiting weeks to get in wherever.
Right, and then we have to figure out as the primary care provider, how do I mind that gap? Okay, I've got one pediatric psychiatrist that's board certified in Utah County, and they're so inundated with referrals that they have expanded their referral team and process to where it's really cumbersome. I get it. They're making it hard. We got to work for it and really prove and sell our case that, yeah, you need to see this patient. And then when it gets it past their referral team, then our patient waits typically 4 months for that initial appointment. So I'm like, how do I mind this gap? So I'm trying to get patients to circle back in every, month or a couple weeks, or depending on what's going on, triaging that. And it's still unsatisfactory because it's to sit back in front of the pediatrician who doesn't know what to do with them.
Right, right.
I need them in front of a mental health professional.
That's right. Well, we're so delighted to hear about that.
And I will totally give you everything I have. I want everybody to be successful.
Thank you for sharing that, Angie. That's terrific. We love hearing stuff like that. It's huge. All right, Stephanie, I'm going to actually pass the fancy microphone to Stephanie. And let's see, Stephanie, you have some handouts?
I do. I have hard copies of both the PowerPoint and the handouts. So if you would like those, I'll just pin this on. And then to go forward, I just hit the arrows.
Yeah, and it looks like we have to not have it in presenter mode.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Okay,
that's fine.
But you're up.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me through the microphone? Yeah? Wow, I can't hear myself through the microphone. That's great that you guys can. Is it?
Yeah, that one's on.
Is it not close enough? Can you hear me in the remote locations? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, good. I won't worry about it then. All right, let me know if my teacher voice isn't loud enough and I need to be louder because I can do that. So first, we've got very limited time, but I have to take just a minute because as a parent, to look at this room, I get emotional. And I did last year, and I would every time I come to present. To see this group of people come together to coordinate care for our children with special needs is truly overwhelming and humbling to me to know you really do care. Because we get caught on the other end as parents thinking, we are caught in this bureaucracy. All I want is an ultralight wheelchair for my daughter because she can't wheel herself in a standard one. So can you please help me? Cassie may not remember me. I don't know if she does. My daughter's Caitlin. You are our care coordinator for South Point for Dr. Lash, and she helped us get that ultralight wheelchair approved. And it's been life-changing for my daughter. We got it just a few weeks ago, and she loves it, and it's fantastic. And we have a care manager. It's not Pat, it's Teresa. Do you know Teresa? If you wouldn't mind letting her know that her friend Stephanie is sometimes a calm, normal, happy, put-together person. I'd appreciate that, because she's seen a different side the last couple of weeks as we've been dealing with a $52,000 bill we got for something that was billed incorrectly, and anyway, I don't deal well with that stress. So Teresa's been very nice. So from the parent standpoint, this is so overwhelmingly wonderful to see people who care so much about our children. So thank you so much for what you do. From the bottom of my heart, from all the parents that I represent, thank you for being willing to do this for us. We appreciate it more than you possibly know. So I do want to talk about Section 504 and IEP. These are topics that could easily take 3 hours, and they're being condensed into about 40 minutes. And I want to try to get through it as fast as I can to leave some room for questions, but we absolutely have to be done on time because the recording shuts off. So I'm going to be going fast. If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll try to get to them during the presentation. If not, just write it down briefly, and we'll try to gather them afterward. I will stay as long as you need me to. You can email or call the center, and we're happy to answer any of your questions. Heather has the hard copies. If you want one, raise your hand, and she'll pass those around. We're just going to get going. All right, so I am Stephanie Roach. Like I said, I am a parent consultant with the Utah Parent Center. I've been with the Parent Center for 4 years as an employee, and 2 years before that I volunteered. It's my dream job. I love what I do. I get to talk to parents every day. I got to talk to one yesterday who was really mad, and that's also lots of fun. I know you guys get that experience too. And but it's really great to be able to help these parents navigate and understand special education, which is what we do. Our services are free. We are throughout the state. We serve the entire state. So if you have a parent you're working with who has questions about special education, please refer them to us. Please have them call us so that we can help them work things out. We are all parents of kids with special needs, so we get it. We've dealt with it. We deal with it on an ongoing basis. We also have ladies with Utah Family Voices. I know Gina has told you all about them, and you probably know all about them, but they help families navigate insurance and work through applying for SSI or the DSPD waiver, or understanding and navigating that end of things as well, which can also be very overwhelming and frustrating as parents. All right, so when we're talking about either a student who needs an IEP or a student who needs a Section 504, and I will explain the difference between those two, the first thing we want to emphasize is that we should be a team. The parent, the student, the people at the school, related service professionals, medical health professionals, if they are invited, are all part of a team to work together to help this child. Sometimes we lose sight of that, especially if there are disagreements and one person wants one thing and the other person thinks it's unreasonable, or they think something else would be better, and there are disagreements and clashes. It can be kind of challenging, but we've got to keep that overall, overarching, most important thing that we are a team. We work together. There's not one member of that team that is more important than another. So we all work together for that child to do what's best for that child. So keep that in mind during this entire process. So we're going to start with IEPs. We're going to talk a little bit about the IEP process and explain what that acronym means for those who don't know. Who knows what IEP stands for? Got a few people in here? Good, good. Most people, sounds like. That's really great. If I say an acronym, that I try really hard not to throw out acronyms, and I do it all the time, no matter how hard I try. So if you don't understand something I've said, just please raise your hand and I'll tell you what it means. IEP is an Individualized Education Program. It refers to special education, specialized instruction, and resources and supports that are needed for kids in special education, for students in special education. And there is federal law that backs this. It's called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. It's been around for quite a while. The last reauthorization was a long time ago, so we keep expecting it to be reauthorized and have things change. It hasn't happened just yet, but we expect with a new education thing going on in the government that will probably have some reauthorization coming through before too terribly long, and then everything we've learned is possibly going to change. But for now, this is where things are. It's a federal education law for children with disabilities that provides an individualized education program, again, IEP, for that child's special education experience at school. So special education, and we'll talk a little bit about how these contrast with Section 504. Special education is specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability, including instruction in the classroom, home, hospital, or institution, and instruction in physical education. So this is really important. It covers instruction wherever that student needs instruction. We talk about instructing them in the least restrictive environment, which is one of their protected rights, that they have the right to be educated in the least restrictive environment that gives them that educational benefit. That's going to look different for every child. For some, it will be a special education classroom. For some, it will be the regular education classroom with supports. For some, it may be in the hospital. They may be in the hospital and need that special education there. For some, they may be incarcerated, and they may need that specialized instruction in the incarcerated setting, in jail or wherever it is. There are some adults who are in prison who still qualify for special education, and so they would be entitled to that. Wherever they are, that specialized instruction comes to them. And it's their right to have whatever is their least restrictive environment. And instruction in physical education. My daughter, not a chance she could have a typical physical education class. It's not possible because of her intellectual and her physical challenges. So she gets specialized instruction in physical education as well. So keep that in mind. It includes all parts of the school day, every part of the educational day, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but whatever is happening in that school day that child needs that help. Lunch, recess, in the halls, library time, wherever it is, if that child needs specialized instruction, needs specialized supports, if they qualify for that through their disability, they can receive those supports. They are entitled to what's called a free, appropriate public education. This is one of our favorite acronyms, FAPE. So remember that, memorize it, free, appropriate public education. It's also interesting to note that every child, regardless of whether or not they have a disability, is entitled to free, appropriate public education. We just use this in special education in 504 to really emphasize that, right? We really do get this. But even if you're a typical education child who doesn't need specialized anything, they're still entitled to a free, appropriate public education. But what this means in this setting is special education and related services at no additional cost to parents. This cannot cost the parents a dime. If they qualify for these services, if the IEP team determines they need it, it is provided to them at no cost. And it's provided as directed in that IEP. Also, here's a big one that a lot of people are surprised about, and I get this question all the time. My child is going to a charter school. Do I have any rights? Is there anything I can do? On social media all the time, oh, you're at a charter school. You don't have any rights as far as public education goes. Charter schools are public schools. They are 100% public schools. They are under the same federal guidelines and rules and regulations and everything else as any other public school in the world, in the country. So if they are going to a charter school and the charter school says, oh, no, we don't do that here, that's really not an acceptable answer. The answer needs to be, does the child need that service? And if they do, how are you then going to provide it for them? And so just keep in mind when you're working with parents that if their student is at a charter school, it's just great. That's fantastic. They should be able to get the supports that they need and are entitled to.
Can charter schools deny entry, I guess, to the school?
No, they can't. So if they have a lottery system, every student has to be in that lottery in the same way as every other student. If they are systematically not choosing kids with IEPs or 504s, it's discrimination, and that can be dealt with through dispute resolution options. They absolutely cannot deny a student because they have an IEP. Great question. Okay, procedural safeguards. So here's a thing where it's a little different between Section 504 and IDEA IEPs, is procedural safeguards. Parents have some pretty serious rights in the special education process. There are absolutely rights under Section 504 as well, but under IDEA they are laid out more specifically and clearly in the procedural safeguards. I don't have a copy of it with me, but it's a booklet. It used to look like newsprint, like you could paper mache your walls with it if you wanted to, but now it's a different material. It was just redone a couple years ago and made a little bit more reader-friendly, which is fantastic. But have you seen that? It's maybe 15 pages stapled together, and it talks about the parents' safeguards their rights. That's okay. If you haven't seen it, it's fine. But that should be given every year, at least once a year, at the child's annual IEP meeting. And these are very, very basic points. Like I said, it's a lot of pages, but this is just a brief overview. Parent has access to their students' records. If they want to know what the last evaluation was and what the scores were on that, what the last IEPs look like, they lost a copy of it. I've never lost a copy of my child's IEP, ever, except every single year for the past 13 years that my child has, 14 years that my child has had an IEP. And I have 2 kids with IEPs, so now I get to lose 2 of them. But if I want a copy of that, I can request a copy, and within a reasonable time, they need to provide that for me. Parent and student consent. You do have the right to consent. You consent to evaluation. You consent to receive services in specialized instruction, special education, and then you can revoke that consent at any time. So parents do have consent, and then the student, if they are age 18 or over, also is then responsible for signing that consent. Confidentiality of information. This is really taken seriously. There's, in the IEP book for every student, there's a form at the front. If you open that book for any reason, you have to sign that to say who you are, where you're from, and why you opened that book, because student confidentiality is taken incredibly seriously. We only want the people who need to know, but those people that need to know really do need to know. If the janitor needs to know that there may be a kid walking down the hall without a pass because they have to run to the bathroom as fast as they can go, the janitor needs to know that. If the lunch lady needs to know that if this kid gets hit with the backpack, he's going to react and be upset in the lunch line, and she may need to mitigate that or figure that out, then the lunch lady needs to understand those things. But only the people that need to know really do need to know what's in that IEP. Disciplinary procedures. Under IDEA, children with special needs have disciplinary procedures that must be followed that are different from regular education. It's a great bonus, especially for kids who may have discipline issues or behavior issues that are related to their disability. And then dispute resolution options under special education. There are special dispute resolution options as well. I had to cut that section out, and I wish I didn't, but you guys hopefully will never be involved in that. But if you ever do have a parent who's struggling, have them call us, because they do have some really great lower level dispute resolution options that almost always solve the problem before you have to get up to the ones that involve more time and more expense. And these dispute resolution options that we're talking about are at no cost to the parent. You can get up to ones that potentially could, but almost always we can get things resolved without it getting to a higher level that requires time in court and money and things like that. Don't ever be afraid to ask for an explanation of your rights, and let your parents know that. It's intimidating, because if you've been in 15 IEP meetings and you still don't understand what IDEA is, you don't want to say that, because you don't want to look like the dumb parent, oh, I should have known that 15 years ago. This is overwhelming, and if you don't do it a lot, and also as a parent, you're in that meeting and you get overwhelmed. I've been doing, like I said, I do this for a living. I've been to literally hundreds of IEPs with people, and in my own, I still get tongue-tied. I still get kind of overwhelmed and, oh my goodness, am I going to express myself well? Did I forget this? What should I do? Am I being unreasonable? So it's okay, really, to ask for clarification, to ask, I need a timeout, I need to think about things. Can we take a 5-minute break and then come back to it? Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself in these meetings, or tell your parents to do so. All right, if a student has an IEP, they do not need a separate Section 504 plan. It will be, in the state of Utah, in almost every single district, they include the 504 in the IEP, so they don't need a separate document. I did run across one district where they have separate plans, and that's fine, it doesn't matter, but you don't have to have it that way. You can have just one all included.
This may be a completely dumb question, so bear with me. Like, what is the difference between an IEP and a 504?
We're getting there. We're getting there. You got it. No, it's not a dumb question at all. And it took me a long time to figure out what the difference was, but we're going to get there. Okay. And I'll give you a very easy way to remember it. Okay. Really easy.
Fantastic.
So under IDEA, there's an evaluation and eligibility process. First of all, you have to determine, does the student have a disability under IDEA? Does it adversely affect educational performance? And does the child require specialized education and services? So it's not just that the child has a disability. Having a disability does not qualify you for IDEA for special education. You also, it's three-pronged. The disability has to adversely affect educational performance in some way, and the child needs to require special education services. There are a lot of times that a child may have a disability such as ADHD, autism, hearing loss, other different things, whatever, and not need specialized instruction. They may not need special education. So even though there's an IDEA classification for that, if they don't need the specialized instruction, they don't qualify for an IEP.
Who determines that?
It's the IEP team through the evaluation process. So what happens is somebody makes a referral and says, we think this child may need some extra help. And the parent, either the parent makes the referral or a teacher, somebody who works with the child, the parent has to give consent. So that's that red box. Parental consent in writing is required for the school to evaluate or reevaluate a child. So the parent has to agree to allow that evaluation. And then they do formal evaluations through a bunch of tests that they've got at the school, informal through observation, looking at grades, looking at, talking to the related professionals that work with them, just classroom observations and things like that, and try to get an overall picture of how the student is doing. They take all of that information and make a determination of whether or not they're eligible for special education and have a meeting with the parent to let them know. And that's called the eligibility meeting. So it is a pretty big process to make sure that that's all done correctly. There are 13 classifications, like I said. I didn't note them all here. I've got them if you want them. I can let you know what they are.
Question.
Yes.
So in my little mind, I'm trying to process from start to where you are. So
Okay.
If I were a mom sitting in a pediatrician's office and he said, do you have an IEP? No, I don't know what that is. Okay, so the physician or his office sends a referral to where?
So the physician absolutely can send a referral for an evaluation, and that needs to be considered by the team. It probably would work better to have that come from the mom directly, to have the mom say to her IEP team, but that's the good question, is who do we send that to? In general, if there's not been any identification of a disability whatsoever, the first place to start would be with the principal at the school.
Okay.
Just send it to the principal. And yeah, the doctor absolutely can, but it would be a great idea to have the parent follow up and have them do it on their own. When we receive outside information, like if the doctor does a full neuropsych evaluation and finds, oh, this kid has this and this and this and this and this, and they need this service, and we believe it would be appropriate in the educational setting, and they send this note to the school with the parent, the school is required to consider it. They don't have to take that information and absolutely do anything with it. That is just one piece of the puzzle in that overall evaluation process that we talked about. Outside evaluations have to be considered. Somebody from the Disability Law Center came to talk to us, and she put it this way, which I absolutely loved. She said, when the school receives an outside evaluation, they have to take it on a date. They don't have to marry it. So that's one way to remember that. So it absolutely has to be taken seriously. If that's your first date, you want to put on a good impression and really pay attention and take it seriously, but you don't have to marry it on the first date. But that does have to be, absolutely has to be a part of that evaluation process.
So does the school have the IEP team, or do the districts have them?
The school. The IEP teams are done at the school, at the school level, although they can involve people from the district if necessary. My teams almost always do. But it just depends on the situation.
Are you guys sending referrals for an IEP, like a written formal referral for an IEP?
We don't.
I'm like, I've never done that. We make a recommendation.
You do what?
Parent requested.
Yeah.
That it be considered and evaluated, and we'll, write some diagnoses that we have, like ADHD or anxiety or something. But then we give it to the parents and we have them set up their own meetings.
We've only provided the letter if mom circles back to us and says,
I'm hitting roadblocks. I'm having a hard time.
Well, that's generally the way it goes. The doctor
I'm
is
like,
absolutely appropriate, though, in suggesting to the parent if they believe that there's a need for an evaluation for an IEP. Parents don't know what they don't know, and if the school's not on top of it and realizing, oh, this kid may have extra issues, they're not just fidgety, and the doctor sees something, they're the expert in that behavior. So, hey, yeah, let's bring it up to the parent and let them know, don't want to alarm you. This isn't, don't get all worried and stressed out about this, but you may want to talk about this with your school. And then at that point, the parent would most likely go to their teacher, their classroom teacher. If it's a professional that wants to make their own evaluation, or their own referral for whatever reason, they would probably go to the principal. There's not really a super protocol for that, and either way, it's going to get to the right person, but in general, that's the way it would go. But a teacher or a parent who's never had a referral before would go to their classroom teacher first.
My wife's an assistant principal in Jordan School District, and I know they take those IEPs very seriously and hop on them quickly, but it's much quicker route to get there if the parent comes in and says, I want an IEP, versus we're relying on some observation in the classroom, and all of a sudden we're thinking, okay, we've now watched this kid for several weeks, and we probably should try to move
because
on.
The school has the school has their RTI process, or MTSS process, which is a totally separate process of monitoring and seeing if they can do lower interventions to avoid an IEP or to see if the child really needs an IEP. And so that can make things kind of challenging too. But if the parent goes in and requests one, there are timelines in place for their rights. So it can happen a lot quicker.
So Alison Lewis, she writes, we send recommendation letters with the diagnosis.
Okay, so they send recommendation letters with the diagnosis. And that can be really helpful, especially with a parent who's timid and doesn't feel comfortable going in and saying, I really need this. They can say, my doctor says we need this. And that can be just a tool for a parent and very helpful. But having that parent go in there and follow up is going to be, as Eric said, it's going to be probably more. Okay, let's do one more question, then we got to go on because I'm going to get cut off pretty soon. You're fine.
Sorry, so I'm just wondering how much involvement you can have, because I've only had one experience so far. The mother's student is in a charter school.
Uh-huh.
They wanted to adjust the IEP.
Okay.
And they weren't very friendly to me on the phone.
Oh, okay.
I know she was having a hard time getting them to adjust that. They were
Okay.
making excuses to me that, oh, he was already this, he was already that, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering how much involvement you can have with them, or if you have any suggestions of what we do in those situations where there's not a lot we can do to help them as far as the school pushing back, because their excuse even was, well, we're not going to have a lot of aides next year, so.
Okay.
Then what do they do in
That's
that situation?
irrelevant.
I hope they're bringing aides in because they've got to have help.
Right. So yeah, that they can't use the excuse, we don't have the resource, we don't have the money. If they determine that the child needs the support, they have to figure out how to provide that for them. The excuse cannot be, we don't have it available. That's just not okay. If that is their excuse, there are dispute resolution options we can go through. The required members of the IEP team, I'm not going to go into detail for all of them, but one of the members is somebody who the parent feels can be a support for them. If that's a medical professional, then that person can come and the parent has invited them, and they are not going to be disruptive to the overall IEP process, because sometimes people bring in friends who are really loud advocates, and that can become disruptive at times, and that may not be the most appropriate person to bring to an IEP. But if it's a medical professional, a support person, a friend, at the Utah Parent Center, we can attend IEPs under our dispute resolution grant, things like that, then that person is a member of the team and should be considered just like everyone else. They are a member of the IEP team. So not one person dictates what happens in the team, but that goes for everybody there. The school can't say, no, you can't talk. Because if you are invited by the parent and that is one of their rights under those procedural safeguards we talked about, you absolutely have a voice there. They have to consider what you say. The school has the ultimate say. They can say, no, we disagree, we don't want to provide this. We can't provide it because we don't have the money. They can say that and give themselves a little bit of rope, but hopefully we can work through that dispute resolution process with them if they absolutely refuse, and we can find a way to try to compromise, or, well, if you won't provide this for them, how can you keep them safe? Or how can you provide something that will help them in this way that we believe is necessary. So bring it, put it back to them. That can be one option in trying to solve the problem, is saying, all right, this is my suggestion. You don't like my suggestion. So I wander here. I'll just carry it. So you don't like my suggestion. So what suggestion do you have to try to solve this problem? And let them put their thinking caps on, and having those parents go with an open mind to think, yeah, maybe these professionals do have an idea that I haven't considered. That can be hard as a parent to say, my idea might not be the best one, and to listen to what they have to say, but that can really help to try to navigate that and figure out a compromise for everybody that may work. And then it can be revisited too if it's not working down the line. All right, so the IEP is your child's written, individualized education program that is developed, reviewed, and revised in a team meeting. Okay, so there's an actual meeting that must happen once a year at least to write this document and get it ready for everybody. So during the IEP development, the team must consider the child's strengths, not just their weaknesses. We want to talk about the things they can do as well. The concerns of the parents for their child's education, results of initial or most recent evaluation, academic, developmental, and functional needs. So all of those things must be considered. You must have at least one meeting per year. However, the team can meet more often if needed, especially if there's an issue going on. And you can reconvene just a team meeting that doesn't necessarily have the entire IEP team there. But if you want to amend something, ask questions, add another goal, fix something on it, a few key people can meet and do that, and then sign the document and get that out to everyone else who needs it without reconvening the entire IEP team. But at least once a year, the entire team must meet. They are required to be placed in the least restrictive environment. We talked about that already. All right, great. Section 504. Let's go through this really quickly and talk about how it's different from an IEP, and then hopefully we'll have 5 minutes for questions. All right, so Section 504 is a different law. Under special education, like I said, it's the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Under Section 504, it is the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That was a while ago. A lot of people in this room were not even born in 1973, right? That was really bad. Well, I was just barely, but anyway. So yeah, it was a long time ago, but it has been updated since then. There are different things that come into play as well, but yeah, this is kind of an old law. It's a civil rights law, and it prohibits discrimination in programs that receive federal funding. Period. Any program that receives federal funding, the people cannot be discriminated against, no matter where that is. That includes some private schools. Special education is not a requirement in any private school, period. Section 504 is a requirement in almost all private schools because most of them accept federal money in some form, whether it's a lunch subsidy or a sports subsidy. If they accept $1 of federal money, they are required to follow Section 504. So these accommodations that we're going to be talking about are a requirement in almost everywhere, right? But definitely in public school. And so for schools, it provides for a plan on how a child will have access to learning at school. Pretty vague. All right, so the focus for Section 504 is equal access and opportunity. So it's equal access to whatever is happening during that school day, and including extracurricular activities, and equal opportunity. So there's our word again, FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education, is a requirement of Section 504 as well. So the definition of a disability is Section 504 is available to anyone who has a disability. Again, they must need accommodations, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But the definition of a disability under Section 504 is an individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Think about how broad that is, right? I think almost everybody in the world would qualify because they have an impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Just briefly, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping. My insomnia is insane, right? I qualify under Section 504 because I have brain fog from sleeping 2 hours a night. Did you hear that, Gina? Just kidding, I'm going to get fired someday. Walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, working. Using the bathroom is on there. That is one of them. If they have a disability that limits their ability to use a bathroom, that qualifies them as well. So if a child has anything that impacts one of these major life activities, they can receive supports and accommodations under Section 504. So eligibility considerations, they need only one impairment, and the impairment can be episodic or in remission. If a child has migraines that lay them out for 2 days every 3 weeks, but the other rest of the time they're just fine, the other 19 days, did you guys see how I did that math in my head? I'm proud. Anyway, so the other 19 days they're fine, but those 2 days they need accommodations. That absolutely falls under Section 504. And also the decisions about needed accommodations should be made without regard to ameliorative effects or mitigating measures. If there's a student with ADHD who is taking medication that takes care of it almost all the time and they're fine, that's great. They still may need a 504 plan, because what if they forget their meds, or what if their prescription runs out and they come to school and they're bouncing off the walls? There may need to be accommodations in place for when the child needs them, even if they have medication that helps to control it. Ask the following questions. Is there a physical or mental disability? If so, does it limit a major life activity? What major life activity does it impact? And does the impairment substantially limit his or her ability to learn or any other major life activity at school, not just sitting in the classroom? Do they trip kids walking down the hall, like my daughter did to the blind child at the School for the Deaf when she went there? It was really fun to deal with that one. Do they, for whatever it is, do they have something that impacts their ability to function in a class, at school, either in the classroom or in another location?
Can that include like social skills?
Absolutely, 100%.
Social skills.
Section 504 process, somebody sees a problem, the parents and teachers have a meeting, there's a referral for a 504, they do observations and evaluations. This is all very similar to IDEA and IEPs. The team meeting of concerned involved individuals is held and accommodations and services are put into place. Here's the difference. With the 504, parents are not required to be there. Under IDEA, for an IEP, parents are a required member of the team. Under 504, they are not. The team can convene and put into place accommodations without the parents' knowledge and consent. Not great. It doesn't happen often. Almost always the parent is involved, but sometimes it does happen without them. There's also not a specific plan or specific guidelines for a plan like there is for special education. So every school can do it differently. It's not even required to be written. So it could just be something verbalized, which is not best practice. Best practice is for it to be written and distributed, and most of the time that happens. However, sometimes it doesn't. And then you should name who's going to provide the services they need and who's responsible for ensuring that the plan is implemented. Best practice, again, is that it should be written, and a parent should require or request a copy of the 504 so that they can see what's on there.
If they know it exists.
And that they know it exists. There are not many situations where a school will implement a 504 without parent knowledge. I've actually never seen that happen. I'm sure it has happened, and it's possible that it could happen. Almost always schools are going to get the parent involved. Almost always. If there's a situation I could see with an adversarial parent, or a situation where they really just want to help this kid and they're afraid they're not going to have support, they may try to put some supports in place. There could be other reasons that I wouldn't even know, but most of the time the parent is involved.
My 23-year-old has had type 1 diabetes since he was 4. And we had a 504 in place. And I'll be honest with you, school didn't really want to have to deal with creating it themselves. Every year we brought in our 504 plan. It wasn't usually revised. It was a little different once we went from elementary to junior high or junior high to high school, that the district nurse would have it approved relatively quickly. We had a nice plan. We had done all the work on it. We weren't demanding anything ridiculous in there, and it just sailed through everything. Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that there are never problems with 504s, because they happen, but as you're saying, that's the general experience of parents. We did our homework and knew what was appropriate and what we could ask, and we didn't make demands that were unrealistic.
Yeah, and the schools really, in my experience, try very hard to do what's best for the child. There are problems. That's why I have a job. But most of the time, schools really do try their best to make sure things are
So, like
appropriate.
in your son's case, an IEP was not the point. He's
No,
fine
no
and
problem.
doesn't need an education
What happens when
program.
we have low blood sugar or high blood sugar, then we're not normal, and what if it's test time?
Right.
So what did we do? I mean, it wasn't really the education side of it, but it was the accommodation for
Right.
the education. So if he had to test his blood right before a test, write his blood sugar on a spelling test.
So the
and then if
504
we
is
had
about
one,
underlying medical.
No, not necessarily.
always-
No, not necessarily.
still-
I'm
I'm still
almost
not
there.
seeing,
I'm
yeah.
almost there. I'm almost
Okay.
there. And that will put everything together for you. I should probably skip to that now, but
So, his question made me think then, when these kids transition out of high school and they're into college, what changes? Universities and colleges, I mean, they accommodate ADA rules,
absolutely.
but is there a process in place to help them if they want to continue on?
Absolutely. So every private or every public institution and most private institutions have a disability resource center that's called something. It's different at every school, and they are required to follow the ADA and Section 504 as well. So having a 504, or if you're a student with an IEP and you have accommodations already written right into your IEP, being able to take those to the Disability Resource Center and say, this is what I've been doing, this is what I believe I need. You talk to their counselors and they can put together a plan for you. So yes, it is also required. So IEPs are not required in in higher education, but Section 504, the team works together to. It's not like they're going to say, you've been receiving every one of these accommodations in high school, we're going to give you all of these here. That's not how it works. They look at it and see what they believe that person needs. But yes, absolutely. All right, and so generally, services and accommodations under 504 are done in the regular education classroom. There's a big difference of note. An accommodation is a tool or procedure that provides equal access to instruction and assessment for students with disabilities. And accommodations are generally what we're talking about with with an IEP or with Section 504. Sorry. So an accommodation would be something like, I can do all of the math that we're doing. I can learn it all, but when we get to doing the problems, it takes me a really long time to do those math problems. Maybe I can only do half of them. So my accommodation would be that I'm only doing half of the problems, and that would be what was written into my IEP, or my 504. Sorry, guys. 504. So if your child can't get all of their homework done, reduced workload, if they need a different place to test because they get distracted by all the kids with their scritchy pencils and tossing papers around and stuff, they can have a different location to test. If they need a ramp to get into the school because they are in a wheelchair or they have a mobility issue that doesn't let them climb stairs, a ramp is a Section 504 accommodation. Being allowed to carry food with you in case your blood sugar falls too low, that's a Section 504 accommodation. Being able to take drinks when needed, get up to use the restroom whenever needed, an accommodation. If you need, like my son who has autism also has an IEP, but almost all of it is accommodations, but he needs a safe place to go when he starts to get overwhelmed. And he self-regulates incredibly well, but he knows if he's about to get overwhelmed and he can catch himself before he crosses that line, if he stands up and goes to his safe place in the school, he can avoid a meltdown and he can take his 10 minutes and then get back to class. He's 14 now. We've been working with this since he was, 2 when he was diagnosed. Last year, he only had one meltdown at school. I am so proud of him. It was 3 weeks before school got out. He made it the entire year, one meltdown, but we've been working with him for 14 years to get to that point. But those are accommodations. Those are different accommodations. So now we're going to talk about the difference between accommodations and special education. So with accommodations, what we're doing is leveling the playing field. I love this graphic because it shows you, look, there are 3 separate boxes here. This is equity. Everybody has their own box, right? Everybody has the same thing. They've all got their own box. So why would somebody complain? Well, look, this tall guy, yeah, he has a really great view. Fine, he may not even be very steady and may fall off the box, but he's got a great view. This guy, yeah, that's great. He's got a good view too. And then this little guy, he can't see it all. Everybody's got the same thing. That's not equality. That's equity, where everybody has the same thing. This is equality. He doesn't need a box. He can see just fine over the fence without one. This guy, yeah, he needs one box and he'll be able to see just fine. and now the little guy gets 2 boxes, and he can see and participate as well. That's equality. So we're not talking about equity. We're talking about equality and leveling the playing field. So a student with a 504 or who needs accommodations due to a disability needs that playing field leveled. They are going to, for the most part, this is a gross generalization, be in general education classes with support. So they may need some extra help to learn what every other typical education student is learning, general education. With special education, with an IEP, they need specialized instruction and services. That is not going to be the general education curriculum that everyone else is learning. They need that curriculum taught in a different way for them so that they can access some form of learning. For example, my daughter is in math, special education, specialized instruction. She is not in the general education. Well, this year she is, but that's a whole different story that I'm having spasms about. But in the general education classroom, that's usually not where it's going to be taught. Sometimes it is. But they are receiving that instruction in a different way. So if somebody's learning all about the Pythagorean theorem and going in depth in the regular education classroom, when they're in specialized instruction, they may learn what the Pythagorean theorem is and learn a way to manipulate that to understand it, what a little bit is, but it's not going to be as deep or intensive as what somebody in regular education is doing, because what we've determined is that person has a disability in the area of math and probably can't learn what everybody else can. If they can learn what everybody else is learning, they could be in the regular education classroom with accommodations and supports under Section 504. If they can't learn what's in the regular education classroom, they need specialized instruction and services that will be given in the least restrictive environment, whatever that is, and they will be separate and specifically tailored to what that student needs. So specialized instruction, special education. If you're my generation, we called it the resource room. It's not really called that anymore. Sometimes it is, but sometimes, like I said, it's performed in the general education classroom. Sometimes it's performed in other locations. But it's specialized instruction that is different. Still, we want to access as much grade level content as we possibly can to give them that exposure, but it's not going to be the depth and the breadth of what you're learning in a regular education classroom. Does that make sense? So Section 504 helps students to receive accommodations to learn in the regular education classroom. IDEA, IEP gives them supports and specialized instruction to learn something that's going to be a little different from what those regular education students are learning. Did you have a question, Tay?
So is there a second teacher involved, or just the lead teacher?
Yes, there's a second teacher. If you qualify for specialized instruction, you have to have a specialized teacher for that, somebody who is qualified to teach specialized instruction, a special ed teacher. There can be aides that help do that as well. It can also be supplemented by the classroom teacher if they are in a classroom to receive some of their specialized instruction, but that has to be overseen by a qualified special education teacher. Okay? All that has to be coordinated. 5 minutes. Okay, so did that help to explain the difference between special education and Section 504? Does that make sense? All right. Under 504, the accommodations have to be individualized. They must place a student with a disability at an equal starting level with the non-disabled student. So again, we're going to be at an equal starting level like we talked about before. And they're not intended to reduce learning expectations. Specialized instruction really does reduce learning expectations, and not in all situations, but in some, it reduces learning expectations. Section 504 does not. And it's allow and appreciate differences in students' learning styles. So they still can receive a little bit of a different instruction, but it's not going to be specialized special education. All right, that's it. You can contact us. There's our phone numbers. You can call us 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and we will answer and give free consultations and help you navigate. We talk to medical professionals, parents, anyone. Gina.
Just an important note of why sometimes it's so hard on 504 accommodations. Special education comes with funding to schools. Unfortunately, 504s are an unfunded mandate, so the schools take all that on. And a real simple, even in our case, for a 504 accommodation, like Stephanie talked about, my son would be in the regular classroom, but then would get the anxiety anytime there was a time test. So the school just took it upon themselves in any class he was in not to tell the students that there was a time frame, which then helped my son not sit there and look at the clock and it was just a simple accommodation that they could make. So it's still the same instruction, but they made it so that he could successfully complete the work with his peers.
When my son was in first grade and full time during the day and lunch at school, we needed to get him an insulin shot lunchtime. We had to determine, was he high, was he low? Did we need to correct for high blood sugar? This is how much he needed for his bolus based off of the grams of carbohydrate in his meal. My wife would write just a bunch of stuff on the side of the lunch bag, and he didn't want to give himself a shot. And so we battled and battled and battled with Granite School District for almost 4 months to try to get an aide to go over to the school, a nurse or someone to go over to the school to be able to help give him that shot. We called in Disability Law Center. It took one call from them. All of a sudden, we had someone that was going to go to the school. About 10 minutes later, Charlie all of a sudden decided, yeah, I can give myself a shot. So we went through all that. But where it was wonky was that it was actually the special ed teacher at the school who monitored every day and just made sure, but she had no special training in diabetes. The poor secretary at the front office had no, but that school rallied around us to make sure my kid was taken care of and reached out and called us. And so
even if it was 10 minutes later that your kid did it on their own, you paved the way for every other kid who comes after. And so it's important. It's very, very important.
And I hadn't looked at it that way. I just knew it was ironic, and that's Charlie's life.
Well,
we jumped through 9,000 hoops, and then, there we go.
There you go. Well, that's good. And Gina makes a good point. And that is actually one of the slides that got removed, is that Section 504 is not funded. So any of the accommodations that are necessary, some cost money. Many don't cost any money at all, but some of them do cost money. That has to be absorbed under general regular education. IDEA, IEPs are funded federally, sort of. I mean, they are, but there are still can be funding challenges, as we all know, living in the state of Utah especially. So,
just real quick, sorry.
Okay.
I just want to make sure before we get cut off, do any of our USU connected sites have questions? This is going to shut down in about a minute and a half, so I just want to make sure. You guys okay? Wes, can you still hear us okay? Seems like you're saying yes.
I hear you,
okay.
But
I'm so sorry about that. We'll figure it out next time. Okay. All right, great. We'll kind of say goodbye now to you guys, but we'll probably continue with a few other questions. But thanks so much for all of you who connected to us remotely through a USU site, and we hope to see you next time for sure. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, questions? Yes.
Do schools have to do like U-type testing?
Does someone have a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, from a USU site?
Do you have a question on at a USU site? Wes? Yes? No?
His audio isn't working, unfortunately.
If you can write it and hold it up, we might be able to see it.
I think we're going to get 12 seconds. Before that's possible. But
Call me, 801-272-1051. 801-272-1051. All right. There's someone there right now. Okay. Okay. Question.
So do schools have to do like IEQ type testing? So I have a family who's new to Utah and had great assistance or support.
Tell me it was California.
Yeah. Texas.
Right. Yeah. Texas, okay.
Texas. And so they've been here now for almost a year and are really frustrated with the process in Utah and can't figure it out. But anyways, their son's been diagnosed with autism, but the parents feel like
Meeting has ended.